The Mega Man Zero series is one of my favorite Mega Man sub-series next to the Mega Man X franchise. Shocker, I know, right? But being that these are a set of entries that focus exclusively on Zero being the main character, and events that feel like one continued narrative certainly was an experience no Mega Man fan has ever felt when it came down to numbered entries. But with 4 games on the Game Boy Advance of all things, and a finale that certainly is one of their most conclusives, it was definitely something new to the franchise. Which is why I decided to rank them today in a tier list. Each game, in my opinion, stands out on its own in not just introducing new concepts and keeping that narrative of Zero going, but considering I've reviewed them all individually, plus I also did a tier list with the X series after I finished reviewing those, I wanted to do the same with the Zero series here. Now, this only means I'm ranking the 4 main games because I have yet to do the ZX duology for the channel, and despite the fact that those games are paired with the Zero games in the Zero and ZX Legacy collection you do get nowadays, I'm strictly focusing on the core 4. And it's cool to look back at these retrospectively to see how I think about them now compared to when I did review them, so this is also a cool reflection period of how I think about each of the 4 games. But if you want more of my thoughts other than this list, then you want to check out those reviews afterwards. But let's start this tier list, and again, since we've only have 4 games to rank here, it won't be too long, and it will be again a generalization of my overall thoughts on the games themselves, which just means for the next how many minutes I have with y'all, I'm gonna be rambling and going off script. With that said though, let's kick things off by going in release order and talk about the first Mega Man Zero game. So Mega Man Zero 1 released during the early days of the Game Boy Advance. So we're talking about 2001, almost close to 2000 here. And the reason I'm emphasizing this when we're talking about the first game is because I'm giving this a C tier right off the bat. Like, Mega Man Zero 1 is not bad, and it certainly isn't one of the worst ones. In fact, I'm going to emphasize this now. None of these games are bad, it's just one is lesser than the other, and Mega Man Zero 1 is that lesser game. I don't know what they were trying to cook with certain elements here when you're trying to compare it to the Mega Man X sub-series, because they're technically the same game with the dashing elements, with the Z-Saber, with the Mega Buster, or the Z-Buster in this case. It's relatively the same formula as the X series, but Zero tries to do a lot of things different here, such as a failed Metrovania attempt. Like, there's a hub world when you're going through the motions in this game, so it's not like a mission-to-mission base as all the other games will do to kind of solidify the experience, especially on the handheld. And so it kind of like makes things feel a little bit half-baked, and because of that is why I consider it to be a C tier just for that aspect. This game also suffers a lot from what I call first game syndrome, something that I also emphasize in my Devil May Cry 1 video that you also check out as well, but that's a tangent, because like I said, with a Metrovania attempt, with the fact that this is something completely different and a narrative exclusive to Zero, like this is exclusively Zero's story, this is way after the events of the X series, who knows how many, like some say like, oh, this is after the events of X6, but nobody knows what happened, at what point does X6 takes place in the X continuity, because we have X7 and X8, to thank for that. So Zero takes place in that aspect, but because of that, and paired with the fact that they basically wanted to do something different, yeah, it shows that this game was suffering a lot, but it laid a really strong foundation for all of the other games. Like, I really enjoyed my time coming back to this and also reviewing it and showing everything that I love about it. The upgrade system is also something that's unique to this, and I'm glad, this is only exclusive to Zero 1 and Zero 2. Zero 3 and 4, they kind of like get rid of that, which we'll talk more about down the line. But Zero 1 just, again, does a lot of different things. I certainly love the boss fights. The characters are also one of the best there is. I really love the introduction to Seal. I love the introduction to the Cyber Elves and that whole system, which is pretty neat to a degree, I should stress as well. And the Guardians are like one of the best characters there is. Like, you got Harpuya, we got, Fafnir, we got Phantom, we got freaking Leviathan, like Fairy Levianthan, and Copy X. Like, those were really cool characters to experience, and the art design for this kind of showcases a lot of that coolness and a lot of that differentiation between the X series and the Zero series, despite what people have to say. But again, bottom line, Mega Man Zero 1 is a C tier because of a lot of flawed attempts at making things different, but at the same time, it's a solid experience, and I definitely recommend people try it out after they experience the other games beforehand. Yeah. And then we got Mega Man 02, which personally speaking, this is one of my favorites out of the four. And why there's a little bit of bias in this tier list here, because I consider Mega Man 02 to be an A tier in that regard. They really improve a lot in terms of what they didn't do right with Mega Man 01, as I expressed. And also because of the continued narrative part of the sub-series, I love that there was a story that was really being driven here, especially with El Piso. I don't care what people have to say about him. I actually love him as an antagonist, as a villain, as just a character in general, because there's a tragedy behind him that I also explained a little bit with, you know, the review video on this. And I just love how he is a counter to Zero in terms of their ideals and their sense of like what they want to do against Neo Arcadia, against Copy X, against like all these threats with the Guardians and all that. And so that's what makes this an A tier for me, because of that aspect of the overall story, but also because there was a lot of improvements, not graphically, but also in terms of the music, in terms of the gameplay, especially the gameplay, because they really simplified it to be more of the standard Mega Man tradition. They kind of figured that, hey, the Metroidvania attempt, we'll just do it for a future project or whatever, which ultimately ends up being ZX, but we'll talk about that when we talk about those games. So they completely got rid of that hub world design, but they made things very simple and unique to the handheld setting by giving us the standard formula of the running, the dashing, the gun, and the sword elements, as well as the utility of new weapons like the returning shield boomerang that I didn't really talk about in the first game, and it's actually one of my favorites. It's a recurring weapon up until 03, by the way, so they really loved this particular weapon. And also they had the chain rod, which was a cool like grappling hook ability compared to the triple rod from the first game. And so they really were going in on all stops here and making sure that this is a sequel for people to remember, and it is a good sequel. Like, I also didn't even talk about the forms that you obtain from using certain weapons and certain conditions and things like that, which basically just makes Zero turn into a different color. And overall, it just felt like more of a Mega Man game, but still making sure that, hey, this isn't a Mega Man game. It has the Mega Man formula, but this is all Zero's story. This is still focused on Zero as a character. We want to make sure that this is what we have. And to further add on to Zero's capabilities and arsenals, they also brought, you know, the boss fights in with a ranking system, which is also another thing they did in the first game, which is stupid in my opinion for all of those games. But hey, if you wanted that additional challenge, if you had like an S rank or an A rank when beating a certain boss, and also with a certain weapon, you got like an EX skill that allowed Zero to do all of his other cool shit back in the Mega Man X games. So there was a lot that they really wanted to do here that I really admire, and why I consider it an A tier. And also we can't forget about the fact that in terms of the music, like I said, Departure, that opening sequence in 02 is fucking iconic, everybody. And because of that alone, I could have bumped it to an S tier, but trust me, there's a reason why it's not, and that's because of Mega Man 03. Now, Mega Man 03 is an interesting case because everybody agrees, especially their grandmas and their moms and even their own cats, that this is the definitive Zero experience, and many consider this, me included, to be an S tier. And there's a lot of reasons why, but the main points for this video is they do a lot of what 02 did right, especially with the forms. There's the part system in this game, which is one of the best there is. All you have to do is just go back and forth in certain stages and find like these chips that you can obtain, and then these secret discs, and you basically get like these cool parts like the double jump, a quicker charge, and auto charge and all that. And it really helps with boss fights, with enemies. If you just want to like do a speed run, like these are really cool stuff that 03 brought, on top of, you know, the shield boomerang returning, the recoil rod being a really cool thing you can use for like added, you know, bonus in combat and gameplay and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's just a pair of tonfas that Zero's knows how to use, and you can use it as like a pogo stick, which is one of the funniest things you can do in this game. But if we're talking story, much like 02, I really love, again, that they want to emphasize and continue on where they left off. And in 03's case, they did so much to Zero here that it really felt like a conclusion to this if it was going to be a trilogy. In fact, that was the whole point of Mega Man 03. They were going to end things off with this being a trilogy. Like, they weren't even going to stop with they weren't even going to try to conclude, I should say, with Dr. Weil, because he returns in this game. He was teased in Mega Man Zero 2 as like a post-credit scene from like the freaking MCU, that kind of, you know, they were trying to do that back in 2002, 2003. And Zero 3 does a really good job at like showcasing that this Dr. Weil is a prick. He is going to do whatever it takes to do whatever he wants, and that's that. And there's also Omega, which is a really cool final boss. It's one of the best Mega Man final bosses of all time, not just because of the music, but because of the emphasis of this being like part of Zero's identity and history. And it's just so cool how many things they did right with Zero 3 that you just gotta watch my video to know more about that. I'm like, in terms of the story analysis, the gameplay, the funny moments you can do, and all that kind of, like, there is just so much that Zero 3 did right. This is not just one of my favorites of the Zero series, but it is one of my favorites of the entire Mega Man franchise. Like, it's up there with X4, it's up there with Mega Man 8 in my opinion. I don't go repeat what to say about that one. It's just up there with those games for me because of how well they made this into a Mega Man game, but also as a Zero game. Like, this is what they've envisioned back from Zero 1, and they made it come true with this game, and it's just the best. Like, fuck it being an S tier. This is gonna be a triple S, like DMC3, which is also funny to think about. A game with a number 3 is considered one of the best in Capcom. That's insane. And then now this brings us to Mega Man 04, the conclusion in quotations here, because originally this wasn't meant to be a thing. This was actually supposed to be Mega Man 1.5. Like, this was supposed to set like in between the events of the first game and the second game. But Capcom decided to make this into a 4th entry because they saw the success of Zero 3, and rightfully so, because again, that game is just fucking awesome. But 04 is weird, and it's an oddball to me because it's not like 01 where it's a C tier, but it's not like 02 or 3 where it's an A or an S, because there's a lot of things that I think feel a little bit backwards about 04, which is why I'm going to consider this one as in the B tier section, because this is a Mega Man game. That's basically the best way to explain it. It just feels like they went back to it being a proper Mega Man game, but in the sense of it just being a Mega Man game. Like, you just happen to play as Zero in this entry, as opposed to it being like, oh, you are centered around Zero's story, but it just so happens to be a Mega Man game like 03, 2, and 1 handled. And it feels weird in that aspect because they do a lot of things right, in my opinion, with this game, like the part system for one. You know, like, I actually enjoyed going back and forth in certain stages and collecting the parts needed to, you know, actually craft them, as opposed to, you know, going back in 03 with the secret discs and then having to decode them and all that. No, I felt like there was more merit in coming back to the stages and like seeing what I missed out on and seeing which enemies could get me what I need to fully equip Zero with the best, you know, tools and abilities to kind of continue with the game. And so I really enjoyed the part system here, but there was, again, that sense of that step backwardness, because unlike 03, where you just had the part immediately, here with 04, it's that whole back and forth with the crafting. And even if I did enjoy it, it wasn't something that was, you know, not as good as what the others did, because it's just added steps to something that was already, you know, simplified and well executed in a previous entry, which adds to that step backwardness. And in terms of this being like a fully Mega Man game, like I mentioned earlier, it's because they wanted the EX skills to be easily collected. Like the S, A rank and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you don't really need that. All you have to do is just play the stages of their respective Mavericks of, you know, in hard mode, which is in quotations, by the way. It's not really a hard mode. It's more of like, oh, you just change the weather to the desire of what that boss needs. So like in one stage you need it to be sunny. There you go. You beat the boss there and you get the EX skill, and or it just so happens to have acid rain in this one area, which is what you need to get the other EX skill. Like, that's basically the criteria you need to collect like the arsenal that Zero has. And the arsenal that Zero does have here is okay. You know, again, it just feels very Mega Man-like, and that's something that I really don't like about 04. They really just simplified this to the extreme degree in terms of gameplay mechanics, but at the same time, they just kind of were trying to make this into the Zero game. Like, for example, the Cyber Elf system here is just one Cyber Elf that you evolve and level it up like a Digimon over time, which is pretty cool. But at the same time, I really enjoyed what 03 did with the cyber elf system, where you had satellite elves and also like the actual upgraded elves that you would sacrifice to the almighty Zero God. And so in this case, it just felt weird. But I will say, the story here and the conclusion with Zero, especially against Dr. Weil at the ending with falling down playing as the, you know, the final boss music, and there was also, you know, Kraft and all of these other characters that were involved in this. It was a pretty cool conclusion. Again, it didn't feel right in terms of like properly concluding Zero, as opposed to, you know, that final boss fight, especially that iconic line that Zero says about he never really cared about being a hero or achieving some form of justice. But besides that, it just was okay, and it's just what it is, you know. Like, I love it, it's not bad, but it's not good like 0, 2, or 3. But at the end of the day, it did its job right, and it gave us a proper conclusion that no other Mega Man franchise has done until then. Like, this is the last game of the Zero franchise, and we finally get a proper conclusion to Zero at the end of this game, which is pretty tragic. But hey, that's all I'm going to say on that front. But yeah, these are basically my ramblings and general thoughts about the Zero series, and like I said in the beginning of the video, these are just simplifications of thoughts and ideas I've already spoken about in their respective videos. But as a bonus even, because I know I said I wasn't really going to talk about these, but hey, I'm even throwing my thoughts on both the DS's Zero Collection and Zero and ZX Legacy Collection that you can again buy nowadays, which I think are solid compilations that bring a nice anniversary feel to the sub-series in my opinion, and it would be a B or A tier depending on how well packaged they are. But hey, at the end of the day, that's just how I think, and I do recommend that you check them out at the end. And if this video piqued your interest in terms of trying these games out and making a list of your own, then hey man, I highly recommend it. You just throw your rankings in the comments below, similar to the X video, because it's very interesting to read what others have to say about their feelings with these games and whether or not you agree with me, which I hope you don't, because the whole point of a tier list is it being subjective. And hey, at the end of the day, it's just pretty fun to see and definitely boost these videos up for others to watch, and you know, have that channel grow and all that kind of stuff. You know, this is also YouTube, by the way. You got to do this kind of stuff. But that's, again, enough Mega Man for the time being, and I hope to cover more down the line, maybe the ZX games. I really want to do those, actually, now that I think about it, since I really enjoyed my time with the Zero games, and they're not really that different in terms of gameplay and narrative and all that. But hey, I'll talk about more of that in depth with these games, because if it's not Mega Man that we're going to be covering next time, then stick around with more Devil May Cry, because I did tease that throughout the course of this video, because yeah, that's happening too, baby, and you don't want to miss that.